Hey, so, hey, Ben here. I'm back recording a thing. No face cam this time because I have a lot of information to show off this time. Because I made a ROM hack for um, another, philosophical idea. I've called it Fire Emblem: The Golden Mean. Of course, I'm a giant nerd because I made a ROM hack about philosophy, vaguely, uh, for a college project. So, well, what is any of this? What is the big question here? Can I use a final ROM hack to prove Aristotle's golden mean? No, that's really not how philosophy works, but, I can try and use it to demonstrate it and a few opinion-y things I have about Fire Emblem gameplay and unit feel in general. So, before we start on any of it, I have some words to define. um, there's a lot, so buckle up. Let's start with the Fire Emblem stuff because my professor, who's going to be grading this, is going to need to know those words first and foremost as I talk about Fire Emblem in a very concise way. He already knows Aristotle. All right, so the actual Fire Emblem words. Unit. Unit is the guy. He's the unit you play. Usually they're defined by their bases and growths. Often there's a name and a character attached, but that tends to be irrelevant if you're a nerd like me. So bases, shortened term of base stats. It's what it sounds like. It's what they start at once you recruit them. There sometimes is variance, but usually it's set in stone. It's usually changes based off of difficulty. Some characters in certain games get like bonuses if you're playing hard mode. That's often because they start out as an enemy, and because they're an enemy in hard mode, they have higher stats. Generally, these are one of the most important factors of a unit in how good they are. Growths are secondary. They can help, but aren't fully necessary. Growth matters more the earlier you join in. It's just the chance of a stat to level up. So Seth here has a 90% chance to level up his HP on a level up, but only a 25% chance to level up luck. So it's part of the balance, and for Seth, not balance of his character. So let's just break down the stats real quick. We have the important ones. HP, if any game has HP. If it hits 0, you die. And in Fire Emblem, death is permanent unless you reset your save, but I don't do that very often. Unless it's like particularly detrimental or if I've game overed. Attack, this is the damage stat. Sword guys will hit the defense stat. Book nerds with magic will hit resistance. It's the sum of your power and your weapon's damage stat, which of course is variable. Power is half of attack. It gets divided into strength and magic in later games, but in the one I'm playing, it's all one stat. Defense is physical defense, swords, axes, lances will bounce off of it, and resistance is magic, so if you can just shrug off a lightning bolt. The less, but also most important stats, skill determines sort of hit rate, so how accurate you are, and your critical hit chance, which generally is, you don't want to be relying on crits unless you have a very specific combination of skills and stuff that don't exist in this game. It's pretty important. It contributes to unit reliability. Luck is the worst one, but it is a threshold stat. You want a certain amount of luck so you don't just randomly die to a 1% crit, which I've had happen to me several times, and it's very unfortunate. Speed, the best stat in the game. Kind of. Speed means nothing without decent attacking stats, but speed is both an offensive and defensive stat. It determines doubling. Doubling is like the final big thing that determines if a unit is good or not. If a unit can double with good attacking stats, they just get to attack twice, which, 25 times 2, as you can see Cormag doing here, pretty good. That's 50 damage. It's a bit unnecessary because the enemy has 28 health, but it's still good. Doubling generally is good. If you don't have any attack stats, you can do 0 times 2, which, is still 0. It's not ideal. Doubling for bulk, as you can also see, helps. If you don't get doubled, you're taking not double damage. So that's generally nice. Your tanks can't be too slow. Otherwise, they will basically not be tanks and just be a punching bag. So, moving on from Fire Emblem terminology, let's get into the Aristotelian stuff. His golden mean, which is the thing I'm sort of focusing on specifically, is excellence, lies between excess and deficiency. So, what does that mean? Let's break it down into a more understandable term. So, let's say you're a banana. A green banana and a brown mushy banana, those are the two extremes. One is too fresh and one is too ripe. The yellow banana, the good, tasty one, that isn't terrible, is the golden mean. It's not deficient in freshness, so it's not all mushy, but it's also not too ripe, so it's not, a tube of starch. It's nice and sweet and tastes good. But before we go on, it's not just the middle. There is some nuance. The golden mean effectively just places walls around actions, generally. It can also be like objects, but generally the golden mean is applied to actions, whether like self-defense is a common golden mean thing. So like the golden mean of being a firefighter actually isn't just to put out an average amount of fires, it is to put out as many as possible to save as many people as possible. Because doing any less would be not doing your job very well. Of course, the excess of this is, being a crazy person who keeps setting fires to keep increasing the number of fires you can put out. That sort of, hero mentality or whatever, right? That's the extreme in too many fires. Or too many fires put out because you've started them. So, in Fire Emblem terms, the golden mean of a unit is weird because it is random. Growths exist. And people have different play styles, so obviously some units are going to be better for different ones. But overall, regardless of play style, a unit who is too good will make the game trivial and boring. And too bad of a unit makes you really wonder why they even exist. But I'm going to go over some specific cases to demonstrate that a little better. So, first of all, how am I measuring a good unit? Personally, I play Fire Emblem pretty quick. Not the fastest possible. I don't go for any crazy minimum turn count, rigging, critical hit, craziness. I just play the games pretty fast. I don't like turtling, which is, playing slow. It's boring, and judging a unit by their capability to stand in the back while your big beefy units just sit there and tank every hit generally isn't a fair standard, because anyone can do that. I also try to go for a lot of the side objectives. A lot, like opening chests, killing optional units, or optional enemies to get better items, stuff like that. And I don't grind. I don't play stuff like the Tower of Volney, or in Awakening getting the items that let you just fight zombies for forever to get a infinite EXP, because that's also not a fair way to judge a unit, because if you just level a unit up all the way to the max level, yeah, of course they're probably going to be better than they would if they hadn't been grinded to max level. So let's go over the really, really good ones, the units that can sometimes, they will 100% carry your run if you know what you're doing, but if you don't play it fully properly, you can suffer from success. They can often beat down waves and waves of enemies, but that's not always a good thing, because sometimes you want to not quite kill an enemy, because if you keep killing enemies, and they still are doing damage to you, slowly you're going to run out of HP, and then something beefier is going to nuke you from that point, or you'll just slowly be whittled down, and you'll just lose your best unit. And actually, a lot of these best units in the game can be the protagonist character, the main character who determines if you get a game over or not. Like, I think actually 4 of them in this little lineup I've made are game over conditions. Not 4, 3 of them. And often they are Cavalier units, because movement, I didn't go over it, movement is one of the better stats in the game, because obviously being able to get to things quicker, being able to help your allies quicker, is generally pretty helpful. You just get to play the game quicker, and Cavaliers generally have pretty okay stats. The only like units that I've put up here that don't really suffer from success have very specific builds, where you can give them an item that let them keep healing as they do damage, or it makes it so they can just never be hit because they always attack first, regardless of if they're surprised or not. The bad ones, the really, really, really bad ones, they're usually too weak. They can sometimes be fast, where they just have really high speed stats, but nothing to do with that speed stat. You can get lucky with them sometimes, and they won't be as bad, but usually no. They require too much effort and grinding to be really worth it. Usually they are archers. Archers have a history in this series for not being good because they lack the ability to counterattack, and that's, one of the strongest things you can do. If someone's hitting you and you can't hit back, that's bad. And of course, any unit who gets grinded to hell to become a crazy unit will be better. So people often defend characters like Lynn, the character at the bottom with the long ponytail. They'll often defend that, oh yeah, if you just feed her a bunch of kills, she becomes good. Yeah, that's true of any unit. That's not a fair metric. And then there's like the weird middle ground, the golden mean, if you will, except not really. These units often are kind of just there. You might have better options, or you might not. It really depends. They usually have a very specific niche or role that they serve. Like Rickon, the character with the big hat in the background, he starts out with a weapon that can do a lot of damage to flying enemies on a map where a bunch of flying enemies show up. And they usually end up as my favorites just because either they end up having really interesting personalities written, but that's not part of their actual unit numerical nerd part. That's just the fun part. Or they just have really specific niches that I like having a character slot dedicated to. Like just a really good long distance healer, or someone who can do deal with flyers, right? That's usually nice. They usually aren't the protagonists, except for this red-haired guy at the bottom. He's like a weird middle ground unit. He is a game over condition, but balance-wise, he's not crazy strong as some of the other protagonists can be. He's okay. He has weaknesses where he can't attack back at range. He's locked to swords, which are generally the worst type of weapon. But he's serviceable enough, and he doesn't need too much feeding to make him okay. You can get a little screwed on his levels though. He has kind of mediocre growths. Also, these type of units end up being the mages, because mages are often strong because enemies tend to not have very high resistance stats. So the balance the devs usually go for is making the mages just okay instead of crazy. There are some crazy mages, though, which I'll go over in the unit review later. So here's my big brain take. Of course, golden mean is not the middle, because the middle is just making every unit the same. So making them have the same bases and growths. And that, some people would say, is the golden mean, but that's not the golden mean, that is the average. We actually need all of these units. We need the really, really good ones and the really, really bad ones to have an actually, fun, enjoyable game. That is where the excellence is. The fun is the excellence of being caught in between the two extremes. Your entire game isn't all crazy cracked out units who can destroy armies by themselves. No, part of your game has really stinky bad units who can't do anything. And like, that's the fun of it. Like, if every unit is the same, it becomes very just determinate based off of class and partially join time. As you'll see, because what did I do to these poor units in this ROM hack? So I purposefully misinterpreted Aristotle because I thought it would be really funny to undo everything I just said. I average every playable unit's personal bases and growths. So I made every unit the same. Because how do you prove yourself wrong? Well, I prove myself wrong by making every unit the same. So there are, of course, some units who get robbed. Garrick was one of my favorites, as well as Sayla, who just get robbed. Why? Fire Emblem is a game of thresholds and niches. It's kind of like, it's a strategy game, but it's also partially a puzzle game. They'll usually give you units who have a very specific role, niche, or like utility, such as Innis in this game. He exists primarily to show up with a silver bow and explode flying enemies, because flying enemies are generally fairly threatening because they can ignore terrain and just, fly over. It's an airplane, but, instead of an airplane, it's a dragon. Right? As far as thresholds go, it's self-explanatory. It's just math. If an enemy has 20 HP, you only need to do that 20. 128 damage is way too much. It's unnecessary. But, just 19 isn't enough either. 30 is okay, but that's fine. Certain units like staff units and dancers are full utility. Their stats don't matter as much, but sometimes magic on staff units is nice because that makes their healing better, but usually just the base healing you get from a staff is good enough anyways. They generally can't fight. But the utility they provide is so much more worth it than just combat. It's not just a combat game. Well, what did averaging everybody do? Like I said, some units got robbed. Seth is usually the best character in the entire game. But he got significantly worse. Most of his stats are about the same, but losing out on a good chunk of skill and strength just made him a little bit more unreliable. He can't reach kill thresholds as easy. He can't hit things as easy. Erica became the best unit in the game by a technical, mechanical thing that I'll go over in unit review. It kind of just communism to the units. If they're all the same, they all have the same bases and growths. It comes down to class. And so Erica's class, Lord, has some very specific traits that make her crazy good. Whereas Paladin generally are good. Seth was still good in this game. He just wasn't as insane as he usually is. Some minor things for the Fire Emblem nerds who care. I'm playing Erica route because I do not want to play Ghost Ship. And I'm also not going to go full into gameplay because that's unnecessary for this project. So, unit review. This is the fun nerd part where I get to talk about Fire Emblem for way too long. Erica turned out crazy. These are her base level 1 stats. Let me go back a couple slides, right? Look at this comparison. She starts with 4 strength normally. This is base game Erica, this larger screenshot. And this is modified Erica. Just all of her stats got larger. Across the board, she just became crazier. Because the way I modified the game is I changed personal bases. Personal bases is something Erica actually doesn't have. She is the only Lord character in the game. Only female Lord character in the game. So, the way this game calculates base stats is you get your class bases, so plus your personal bases, and those are your base stats. Enemy units will use just the class bases, so they're generally weaker. And your playable characters will have class bases and personal bases. Erica, by default, only has class bases. Because she's the only one of her class, not even any enemies are lords. So she just magically got personal bases. So she basically just got like double her stats. And became crazy. But I didn't want to not give her the average personal bases, because that would just be unfair. So she got them and became the craziest unit in the game. Seth, generally, like normally he's a 5 out of 5. But he got nerfed a decent chunk. He's still really good. He's still a paladin. He still has crazy high move. He has all the utility stuff you can do. Like Cavaliers are really good at rescue, the rescue mechanic, because they have a secondary ability called Canto where they can move again after taking certain actions, such as rescue. And he just provided that utility, and he's still a pretty decent combat unit. Like, compared to Erica, like, he's still better off at base. He's a little bit slower, but he's bulkier and has higher strength, so he can still, like, hold off enemies for a while. He gets less EXP because he is a promoted unit. He is technically starting out at a higher level than everybody else. But he still does pretty well into the end game still. Gilliam, he has the Armor Knight curse. Armor Knights have really low move. They are big, bulky guys with too much armor, so they just can't... They don't have high speed stats at all, generally, and they just can't get anywhere. He was good enough early game. He helped deal with like big hordes of really weak enemies, and he actually got a decent enough extra speed in the early game to let him double some of the weaker enemies, which usually doesn't happen. He just couldn't keep up, literally. His low move stat made it impossible for him to be with the rest of the army at all times. So he would like stay back and deal with little scrubs that I could leave to him, but he just fell off. Probably if you trained him a bit more, he can turn out to be a decent Great Knight, but that's because he just gets a horse with good stats, and horses are good. Franz is crazy. He's your earliest joining base cav. He's pretty much just Seth, but a little bit weaker, but with more opportunity to get EXP and level up. And the average growths for everybody actually turned out pretty good. So, like, his level ups were good. He can promote too, and when you promote to a higher class, so going from Cavalier to Paladin, you get some extra bonus stats on top of that. And 10 base speed is just kind of crazy. Like, Erica had 14, and she's like, you know, the best unit in the game. 10 ain't that bad either. Boulder, he's your earliest joining staff unit. He's a healer. His stats don't matter at all. Even in base game, he didn't have much magic, and he was the best healer. One thing he did lose out on is his con stat, which helped him do some utility stuff like rescuing, but it wasn't too terrible. He just spammed heals and was just my best staff unit in the game. He gets a lot of staff rank by just spamming heals. That's another thing. There are weapon stats, so like you can level up. The more you use a sword, the better you get at it, is the premise. And of course, the earlier you join the game, the more opportunities you have to level up those stats. Those were not something I averaged. I kept those to every unit because I felt like doing something like that would just be too specific and down in the details. At a certain point, I would just, if I really wanted to average everything, just make everybody the same class. Just have a bunch of the same unit. And that would just be, you know, boring and not fully to the point of what I'm going over. Vanessa was really good. She's a flyer. She's a lot slower than usual. Units that had exceptionally high stats, like Vanessa, like her speed, were hit really hard by being averaged. She still has flyer utility. The lower con, or actually, a lot of units wound up with higher con, so it was harder for her to rescue. Because the base constitution stat of classes, like the Pegasus Knight, is really low. So she just had a hard time doing a lot of the flyer utility stuff. But she was still a flyer, which can, fly over terrain and get to certain goals faster. She couldn't, like, pick people up and airdrop them as well as she used to, but she still can be a combat unit that flies over everything. She promotes to one of the best classes in the game, Wyvern Lord. It's just Pegasus Knight, but better in every regard. One thing flyers have to watch out for, because they are so strong, is that game balance wise they are weak to certain magic tomes and bow and arrows, and wyverns have really high defense, so the bow and arrows become less of a weakness. Ross actually turned out pretty crazy. Usually I'd consider him maybe a 3 or a 4, kind of depending on luck, but he usually starts out really weak, and you have to level him up really hard to make him actually good. And that just takes a lot of effort. But with this, he started out a little bit better. Just enough to actually be, like, reasonable to train him up instead of having to feed too many kills to him. He doesn't start off as good as his father, Garcia, who I'm going over next. But he just turned out really good. He's one of those good combat units who will show up, do a bunch of damage, clear out a horde of enemies. He can suffer from success, of course, because he's not Erica, who has a really high avoidance stat, so she just doesn't get hit at all. But I would just use some of my flyers in the later part of the game and just drop him somewhere, and he would just clear out the entire area. Yeah, he's just a solid combat unit. Garcia, generally he's a little weak. He's a bit too slow base game. But this, he got a bunch of speed, and he actually was able to put in a good chunk of work. He's a Ross you don't have to train if that matters to you. But he does have less chance to promote and get EXP than Ross, so it's a trade-off if you're willing, if you're less willing to train Ross. But because Ross joined so early, it makes it easy enough to train him. He's good. He's one of those good enough, I'd say probably golden mean units. Garcia was good enough the whole run. Because his higher base speed, he wasn't doubled, and he was actually doubling a decent amount of things. And he could wipe out enough enemies, because this game is very enemy unit bloat heavy, and that's just a nature of the game that you have to deal with. He used to have a really high HP stat, and that was his thing. He was a big bulky guy who could take a lot of hits. So he lost some of that, but he's traded it for a better speed stat, which is also a bulk stat when it comes down to it. I promoted him to hero, and he did pretty well. Gave him some extra speed, so he was able to double stuff. He didn't hit as hard as Ross at the end of it, because I put Ross in Berserker, which just has, less speed but higher attack. Garcia just, he hit hard, he hit fast. He didn't, explode everything like Ross did, but you don't need to explode everything. You just need to, kill. You just need to win. Naomi sucks. Nothing you can do to Naomi makes her good. I think she's a little bit stronger. She has the Archer Curse. Generally, archers are bad. They're locked to 2 range, which means, sure, they can attack from a distance and not get hit back. But if someone just walks forward 1 more space and hits them, they can't hit back, which is detrimental to them greatly. She doesn't even really have much of a niche. There's not too many flyers at the point where she joins in the game, so she doesn't have a use. She can't, be an anti-air crazy tank thing, because there's no air to be anti. And also, I don't like her as a character, character writing-wise. All she does is cry, and it's dumb and boring. She has speed, and can do chip damage. That's all the utility she really serves. and she's probably one of the first units you're gonna bench. Calm is actually good. Nami recruits him, so that's another quote-unquote utility she serves, but he's the recruiting tutorial, so it's pretty hard to fail. He's a thief. Thieves have the utility of opening locked doors, opening chests. They have a secondary utility of just sitting on a terrain tile with their really high speed stat and dodging everything, so just luring enemies out. Because generally they are more frail, and you can see that he only has like 5 and 3 in his defenses. So he's fast, so he doesn't get doubled. He generally doubles, but he doesn't do a lot of damage. He's an okay unit as far as combat goes, but the utility of being able to open doors and chests, get items, and steal items, there's not a lot of opportunities to do that, but you can steal items from enemies. And thieves provide more visibility in like obscured fog of war or like darkness maps, which is an underrated utility that I don't see a lot of people talking about, because I really hate fog of war maps. I want to see the game I purchased. Loot. The mages got really screwed over with their stats being averaged, because magic classes have really low stats since enemies use that, and enemies are generally weaker. The mages have really high personal bases to compensate for being in just a weaker class. And you can kind of see that with loot. 5 damage, 5 magic, even though enemies generally have less res, it's still not good. And the lower speed, I think she got a little bit slower. It's rough. You can do chip damage. It's like Nami, but a little bit better. Mages have the thing where they can attack at range too, but they can at least counterattack. And that puts her above Nami. Loot can maybe be promoted to something with staff utility, or you can have a mage on a horse, which makes them slightly better because they would have more range. But still, it's not really worth training her. Pretty much the same goes for Arthur. He has more resistance, barely, by 1. This enemy is very heavy with monster-type enemies, and bishops have a skill where they do extra damage, similar to bows against flyers, to monsters. And if you really want to use him, you can promote him to bishop for that, and then he would also get some staff utility out of it. But you still have to try really hard to train him, and it's kind of just not worth it. Natasha, she's Molder, but again, she joins a little bit later, so she has less opportunity to train her staff, but she does start off with a slightly higher staff rank than he did. She can be a replacement if you got your Molder killed. She heals pretty well. She recruits slightly worse Erica, that being Joshua. He's still good. I mean, he's not Erica. Erica's the best thing in the game, but he's probably a good second. Even without having a horse, his combat is so good. He's one of those units who can just airdrop somewhere and he'll wreck house for a while. Fast, so he does solid damage. He has less bulk than Erica, I think. Because by the time you get to him, Erica will have a bunch of levels, and will be a little bit bulkier from the level ups. He actually got an extra amount of strength growth percent from being averaged, because generally he does struggle a bit for damage base game, but just that tiny extra bit of strength pushed him to the point where he can be just a crazy unit. He is prone to suffering from success because he is pretty frail. Ephraim, he's got the same situation as Erica, where he doesn't have personal bases technically. He does have personal bases, but barely. He joins a lot later. He joins about halfway through the game. So he doesn't have as much opportunity as Erica to train on Erica mode. Remember, I am playing Erica route. Ephraim and Erica have different paths you can go down where it focuses on either one of them. So Ephraim probably would turn out to be as crazy good as Erica if you played his path. I just didn't want to. He's good. He's good. He just, for me, because being missing for half the game was not as high level as Erica. But he was still really good. Ford, also really good. All the Cavaliers are good. They're literally the same. Like, they're literally the same. It kind of just comes down to how lucky you get. He was super lucky in my run. He was able to promote early. He just got really lucky with level ups, and he kind of fell off near the end because Franz, with his significantly earlier join time, does it. Ford and Kyle have this curse where they kind of show up a little bit later into the game, so they have just less levels. But yeah, they're the same unit. They're literally the same. Generally, they usually have something to differentiate them in base game. Generally, Ford ends up being the worst one. And Franz is better than them anyways because he joins earlier. But they're the same unit. My Kyle died. He just got really unlucky. Tana, Vanessa, but worse because she joins later. Like, here's Vanessa's stats. Or Tana's stats. They aren't Vanessa's stats. Like, they're the same. Because they're the same class. And so, they're just the same. She joins later, where enemies are a lot stronger, so she has a lot harder time beating them. Because by then, your Vanessa will probably have a couple levels on her. She also just starts with a really bad inventory, so you have to trade her some weapons to fight with, but she still has fire utility. I left her in the range of an archer by accident and got her killed, but I was like right at the end of the level, so I didn't want to reset. This has repercussions later. Overall, she was okay. Amelia sucks. I don't understand anyone who defends her. She is a trainee unit, a recruit, which means she's similar to Ross in that she has like a lot of chances to level up and grow, but you're already about halfway through the game at this point. Your Ross is potentially promoted by now. No. Like, you have to go through a lot of effort just for her to be another Cav, and like you already have Seth, Ford, Kyle, Franz. You have so many other Cavs who are just going to be better than her without any extra effort. She is technically better than in base game, but she still sucks. Like, if this is kind of just middling, this is bad. Like, look how much worse she is. It's just not worth training her. Garrick was robbed. Garrick is usually one of those okay, not like stupid crazy good units. He's just solid. He's just a good unit. He kills things well enough. He's fast enough. He's bulky enough. But he lost all of that. His strength, speed, and defense are just gone. I think he might be a bit faster, or it might be the exact same speed stat. He's just bad in this. He just got robbed because he joins later. He also is level 10, which means he can instantly promote to the hero class and get an extra bump in stats. So you can maybe justify that if you have an extra promotion item laying around, but it's not worth. It is not worth at all for this version of Garrick. Tethys joins the same chapter. She's the dancer of the game. You only get one. She's really good because dancers give your units an extra action when she does her class-specific dance. Her stats don't really matter, but she's technically a bit stronger. She's a little bit bulkier, harder to get her killed. Whoopee. So, like, she basically functions as, like, oh, you have a good unit? Well, dance, now we have two good units. Or two of the same good unit. Marissa, it's Garrick, but worse. She has extra speed, but she does not have a strength stat. She is one of those 0x2 units. She comes with a custom weapon called Shamshir, which just has a 60% chance to crit. Wahoo! Crits do 3 times damage. Wow! 0x3 is still 0. It doesn't matter at all. Innes actually he still kept his niche. He's a lot worse than in base game. He's a walking silverbow. There's a lot of flyers on this map, so he has a niche. He has a job he can do. where he will be able to just explode one flyer unit a turn, and if you dance, that's 2 flyer units he can nuke. He generally has a little bit more general combat utility in base game, but he lost a lot of speed and I think some strength, so he's just a little more difficult to use. I think he died right near the end, dealing with some flying units, and he got hit with like a magic attack by a different enemy, and he just died because I didn't level him up much. But him starting out with the ability to use a silver bow is good enough, because that effective damage coming off of one of the strongest weapons in the game, it hits pretty hard, and that's all you really need him to do. La Rochelle, she's a staff on a horse. Pretty good. She joins a little late. She's probably gonna have less staff rank than your Molder at this point of the game, so she won't be able to do as many utility things, but like she can reach farther than Molder, so she won't fall behind as much if you end up using her. But you're gonna have to put some pretty intense staff training to get her up to Molder's level. But she's good enough. She functions well enough. She's a good replacement if you somehow lost both of your staff units at this point. And she's okay. Dozla, I feel like, has some potential. He's one of those okay units. He can replace either Garcia or Ross if you lost them. He does pretty decent damage. He starts with a good weapon. He used to be like super like crazy. I think he had 43 HP in base game. He has 30 now. That's pretty rough. But his speed is okay. He doesn't get doubled by much other than like the super faster units. And his strength is okay. He still does good damage. Because axes, he uses axes. Axes generally have higher attack stats than like swords. So his damage will still be pretty respectable. And his con means he doesn't get slowed down by bigger weapons as much. He's still a good unit. He's just probably not as good as like a well-trained Garcia or Ross at this point, but he's a good replacement. Sayla, man, Sayla got robbed. He usually has like some of the best stats in the game, and on top of that, he's a mage with staff utility. He's just crazy good. He generally will, if you've lost all of your mages and staff units, this is your guy. Even if you haven't lost them, slot this guy into your team because he's good. He's still pretty good. He does okay. He is not as crazy cracked as he used to be, but he still puts in some good work as a staff unit. There are certain staffs that get more effective range if you have a higher magic stat like he does. So he's good with those, with the longer range staffs, but he won't have as high of a staff rank as your Molder again. He's good enough. He's no longer as crazy good, and I think Sayla alone in this proves kind of that golden mean thing. Sayla used to be crazy cracked good, not just good, great, and he didn't even suffer from success too much because he actually had some okay bulk for a magic unit, and of course staff utility is just crazy good. He still has that. But he still has okay enough stats to provide the niche of doing some chip damage, attacking units that have really low res and being able to knock them out. And the staff utility kept him a solid part of my team until near the end game, where I think I might have gotten him killed by a stray like ballista or something. But he's good. Ewan, his student is not. Ewan is like Ross and Amelia, but worse because he joins like way over the halfway point. He's very bad. He's a weird game design choice. He's one of those, I will join at the end of the game and have really bad stats, but if you level me up a lot, I'll be good. Cool, but I can give that EXP to, Sayla or Dozla and catch them up to be good units instead of making you just an okay mage. Yeah, if Sayla is pretty rough at this point, what is this? Why is he here? He's one of those really, really bad units. Cormag is interesting. Because I got Tana killed, I didn't get a chance to use him, but he did show up still as an enemy to recruit. He's pretty good. He's worse off than he is in base game. Base game, Cormag is pretty good. Because he starts out as a Wyvern class and can promote, similar to Vanessa, to Wyvern Lord. One of the best classes in the game. But he has better bases, so his immediate promotion will make him like a pretty solid unit. If you want to put some EXP into him, go ahead. It's not really worth. Just go ahead and promote. So he can just be a good enough unit. He will be one of those good enough flyer, utility, decent damage, decent speed, pretty okay bulk units. But obviously, with that res, watch out for any sort of magic. Renok, he's another thief. He's probably going to be the same as your Colm, unless you've been using Colm as a combat unit for whatever reason. They have, I'm pretty sure, the exact same stats. But he's technically promoted, woo, and has a higher base sword rank, woo. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter much at all. He's just another thief, so you can either have a slightly better thief, or you can just run around with two thieves doing two things at once, which is what I like to do. Noel. He's generally kind of rough to use. In base game. In this, his stats are just way worse. On top of that, he kind of just dies in the chapter he joins because he's immediately swarmed by a bunch of enemies. You can send him to run away, but like, he's not doing anything at that point. He's just running away, not contributing much. He just joins too late to be of any use. He gets access to Dark Tomes, which generally do like some pretty weird stuff, like ignoring enemy resistance stats. But it's still not worth it. He can maybe promote to get access to stabs, but it's still not going to be worth it. He died for me. Dusel is another one of those pretty solid units base game who relies on a lot of bulk that kind of just got robbed of it. He's still kind of tanky, but not as much as he was originally. The map he joins is the same as Noel. You get swarmed by a bunch of units, and he's supposed to be here to tank all of them, but he just can't do it as well. To a degree, he both suffered from success and suffered from not succeeding. He just suffered. He was able to kill a decent amount of units, but because of that and his lack of actual good bulk, he just got wore down. But there were some units that were too strong for him to just wipe out, and so they were just able to whittle him down too. He just did not have enough of anything to be able to live. If you run away with him, probably he'd be good, but I felt it was better to leave him there and whittle down the units so some of my better units, some of my flyers could run down and clear up the scraps. He did good work for what he did. Mir, she's a walking dragonstone. Her base stats don't matter too much. She does effective damage to monsters, and dragonstone is one of those really strong monster effective weapons that kind of explodes on everything. So pretty good with that. She usually has like 100% growths in a bunch of her stats, because the idea is, she's a young dragon training to become stronger, and so she just grows really crazy if you level her up, but she generally has worse bases, so it balances out. Mine died, I think, because she got hit with a really low percent crit chance, which is rough. One of the averaging of growths side effects that happened was everybody had lower luck across the board, so critical hits were actually fairly a common occurrence and were kind of scary. But as far as unit review goes, I'm done with that. My final thoughts are just that making every unit quote-unquote the same by making them have the same growths and bases kind of like proves to a degree that the golden mean isn't just the middle. Because a lot of these units just got worse than they were. they wound up being deficient after being put into the middle, right? They were not excellent. They were the green bananas that were too fresh. That were like crappy starch that didn't do anything. The game was also kind of well, other than Erica, probably Ephraim and Joshua, was pretty much completely devoid of the too ripe bananas. Like, there wasn't really any crazy good units other than those three. There's generally more than that. Like Seth is usually crazy good. Franz wound up being crazy good, but I just got really lucky. He's generally going to be one of those middle units. Generally, you have a lot of really powerful units in Sacred Stones. But, like, banishing everybody's stats to the average just didn't work. The golden mean is actually, you know, like the weird in-betweens. Units that have niches that are good and are strong was kind of what every unit wound up being, because they just wound up being, rather than their specific unit with their niche, they were just another cavalier, or another mage, or just another unit. Like, and they lost all of their uniqueness. And that's where a lot of the fun comes from in Fire Emblem, is these unique, specific characters you get, which are super fun, and have their silly little niche that they do. They were robbed of that. So the golden mean of Fire Emblem, the Fire Emblem golden mean, is having a diverse range of power in units. Because, honestly, a part of the difficulty in Fire Emblem is you can choose to use those weaker units. You can use significantly worse characters as an option. Or you can play with the really good units. And averaging everybody's stats was kind of it was a fun exercise. It was kind of silly to see Erica be crazy and Seth not, sweep through the game. But overall, I think base game is probably more enjoyable. It is generally an easier game, which is why I decided to choose it, because you do have a lot of really good units. But it was just boring, because, like, if Franz wasn't going to be my main cavalier, Ford or Kyle were going to be the cavalier. There wasn't any interesting choices. It was like, well, I didn't get lucky with this one, let me try the next one. Didn't get lucky with this one, let me try the next one. Versus Fire Emblem generally having more diverse and specific, like, oh, do I want a faster cavalier that does less damage? Or a slower, bulkier cavalier that can hit like a truck but doesn't double, you know? You lose a lot of that, that nice, cool, interesting decision, like, stuff that a golden mean Fire Emblem of having diverse units would have. Overall, the point of this video was just kind of wanted to have fun with this, and yeah, the golden mean's not the middle. It just isn't. That's the end of the video. I had a lot of fun with this. If people want me to put the patch file for this somewhere so they can try and play it for themselves, ask. And I might try and figure it out and put it in the description or something. But otherwise, that's it.